Sometimes it's interesting to read a story that you associate with a different time of year because it kind of enables you to hear it different. So that's one of the reasons we pulled it out, the classic Epiphany story. But it begins by saying in the time of King Herod, and King Herod is a prominent character in the story today. It's probably good for us to flesh out a little bit more about who Herod really was. He wasn't green like the Grinch, but so be it. He came to power somewhere around 37 to 40 BC. He was appointed king of Judea by the Roman Senate while he was in Rome at one point. Probably talked his way into being appointed king. But it was not necessarily a peaceful transition. It's, when our presidents switch hands, it is peaceful. Their race for the presidency might be radically different. It might be hostile. But ultimately, on Inauguration Day, it is a very, very clean, smooth transition where one steps aside to let the other take power. Herod, basically, once appointed king, had to go back to Israel and sort of take his territory by force. And for more than 3 decades, he ruled major portions of the Holy Land with what we would say is an iron fist. And no matter what, he was the type of person who would do almost anything to go the extra mile to stay in power. He outlawed public gatherings and public meetings for fear that people were plotting a revolt against him. He was kind of a paranoid soul. He built fortress after fortress in key spots so that if trouble came, he had a place where he could quickly flee for refuge. If you're standing in Jerusalem, you can literally see one of the fortresses he created. He literally had people saw off the top of a hill and create what's called the Herodian. A place called Masada down south toward the Dead Sea is literally built on the edge of a cliff. It's a scary place to go up. But some of you remember 13 years ago when we had Y2K, 2000, you heard stories after story of people who stored water, stored food to last for months on end. In a sense, Masada is a place where so much could be stored. Herod could go there and survive for months, maybe even years, with all the food, all the weapons, all the supplies stored there. He was a person who built and built and built and accumulated land and possessions. He secured his legacy by building palaces, ports, expanding the temple. He was a skilled politician, skilled at getting his own way, wasn't one who compromised very much. His legacy was about seeking his own advantage for almost 4 decades in power. If you stood up to Herod or threatened him, you weren't going to last real long. He had his wife executed, had his 2 sons executed. Wasn't a real good guy to be on the bad side of. The story, though, I read this a moment ago, is about the Magi. We often refer to them as the wise men or the 3 kings, but in Greek it's Magi. They're not. They show up to Jerusalem and they are asking, "Where's this new king? Where's this new king?" So we know a little bit of the background. We should be worried about the wise men. But Herod, ever the politician, engages them in a dialogue and basically says, I'd really like to meet this new king. I'd like to introduce myself to him, if you will. And so they go search, the Magi go searching, and when they don't return to give him word of where this new king is, if you keep reading in Matthew 2, you understand that Herod orders a genocide. He orders the killing of all boys 2 years and under. Herod, what we need to see, will do whatever he needs to do to get his own way. He'll do whatever it takes to keep his privileged status. That's his legacy. Many people in the world will do whatever they can to keep their privileged status. In radical contrast, though, we have the story of the Magi. And the story of the Magi really is about how they considered it a privileged status to get a chance to meet the new king, to be in his presence, to see this child Jesus, the new king. And they'll do whatever it takes to encounter him. They will travel great distances. And it's not that they were traveling by plane or train or vehicle like you and I would in relative comfort. They had to travel through hardship, through desert, through sweat, through sand in their eyes, through very, very rocky terrain, and at times I'm sure they were lacking water, all to meet Jesus, this different kind of king. And they go to the current king, and you realize they really are in danger in what they ask. But they say, in a sense, to him, there's a new king in town. That's the one we owe our allegiance to this Jesus and his ways. And so they go search out for him, and take note that when they do find him, it says they're full of joy. They entered the house, and they worshiped and gave thanks for Jesus. They knelt down, which you can imagine. In the Middle Eastern culture, you can imagine them kneeling down, putting their head on the ground as a sign of respect, in a sense saying to this infant or this child Jesus, you are superior to me, you are precious to me, I serve you. And in that context of worship and thanks, it says they opened their treasure chests and presented gifts to Jesus. In the Greek, what it says is they gave an expression of honor, or they gave a sacrifice, or they transferred a gift to the advantage of Jesus. But what we have to see is they gave something of value to them in the context of worship to bless Jesus, to bless his movement. If you read the Gospels, if you read the book of Matthew in particular, this is the first stewardship story in response to Jesus. It's about people who go the extra mile to bless Jesus and his movement in the world. It's about people who, in the context of worship, give Jesus their very, very best. And they do it with joy, and they do it freely on their own. And we've been telling this story about the Magi for 2,000 years. That is their legacy of giving joyfully, going the extra mile. St. John Chrysostom, one of the early church fathers, once said, "The rich person is not the one who has much, but the one who gives much. For what one gives away, he keeps for all eternity." And I find that to be a very, very meaningful reminder. I'm a product of the 80s. Okay, it was a time of bad hairdos for one, and bad clothes. But what I remember of my high school and college years was, it seemed like all I was hearing was, it's important to live like a king, to get as much as you possibly can get. That's kind of the world of my formative years in school. And as an adult, I realized that just never would ever satisfy me, and I find it far more important to give to the king. To give to the king and learn to be a giver. And I find that that's a deep need in my life. I need to give. I find that as the years go on, I find possessions mean less and less. I find that, I'm probably like some of you, you look around the house and say, why do I have this? And we're continually downsizing even at 44. I'd like to get rid of as much as humanly possible because it just clutters up my life. And what I realize is I find that I want to give. I want to be challenged to give more and more, and I need to be challenged by God. I need to be challenged by people like you to say, be a giver, Dave. I remember 10 years ago, right before Commitment Sunday, we got a nice note in the mail. It was on a Thursday, I believe, 3 days before Commitment Sunday, and it was a note from Cornell University, which is where my wife went to law school. And it basically says, you owe nothing anymore. You have made your last payment, and you are free and clear. And what I remember sharing at that moment, I just remember it loud and clear, was that bill, which was almost $500 a month, meant something. It was either money in the bank or money to do something with. And it was that moment in time, I think we made that conscious decision that maybe this is a God moment for us, that what we had already been giving, maybe we can just tack that amount that we've been giving to Cornell and give it to the church. That was where our journey as a tithing family began. And it was scary to do that, I would say, with 3 pretty small kids. It's scary right now with many, many years of college just about to hit us. But I have found that in those 10 years of tithing, I've never found that I've ever regretted that one bit. I've found great joy in being able to give to this church And what I find is even in those moments where things seem uncertain, and some of you are living with a great amount of uncertainty right now with the shutdown, I find that God always provides for us even when we're a little bit fearful. God never lets us down. You know, we are a church. We gather, and I look around, and I know there are many, many wise men and women and children in this congregation. You're a people I value and trust. And I know that all of us, deep down, what we want to do is we want to honor Jesus as best we can in all the days to come. We want to see his message grow in this world, and especially in Gaithersburg and this immediate community. I know that almost all of us would say loud and clear, it is a great privilege to be a community of faith that we are at Good Shepherd. It is a great privilege to be a follower of Jesus. As we've been talking about, next Sunday is our Consecration Sunday. Simply pray about what you feel you are called to give to the King in the coming year in helping his mission grow forward. Pray about it. Come to some sort of conclusion about it. Feel good about that. Write it down. And come and be with us and celebrate. For whenever we give, we trust that the Lord celebrates with us. Amen.